This podcast is made possible by your support and your donations. Thank you. And by the purchase of my book called Everyday Buddhism, Real-Life Buddhist Teachings and Practices for Real Change. I will post an affiliate link to the book on Amazon in the show notes. And if you've already read it, please take a minute to rate and review. And also consider purchasing it again for a friend or family member as a gift. Welcome to Everyday Buddhism, making every day better by applying the proven tools found in Buddhist concepts. Welcome to episode 96 of Everyday Buddhism, Making Every Day Better. I am excited to have Roshi Eve Marko join me for a conversation about the Book of Householder Koans, Waking Up in the Land of Attachments, which she wrote with Roshi Wendy Agyoko Nakao. I invited Roshi on the podcast after, I'll say, discovered the book. It was released in 2020, and I have no idea how I missed it, which is why I say discovered it. Maybe it was because it was released at the beginning of the pandemic, and I was battling multiple demons like so many of us, but I am sure glad I did finally find it. It's become one of my new favorite books and a real treasure as a practice tool. So much so, I am planning to launch a Buddhist book club as an offering of the Everyday Buddhism membership community. And this book will be the first we read together. The book club is for the Buddhist curious, for nightstand or book Buddhists, and for long-time Buddhist practitioners. I know many would love to read Buddhist-oriented books with others so you can stay motivated and inspired, but you aren't ready to commit to a Sangha or a focused study group. This curated virtual book club might be just what you're looking for. We plan to use a combination of message-based discussions on our private community and once-monthly live virtual gatherings led by me. The date is to be announced, but tentatively later this fall, hopefully before the beginning of the new year. So keep your eyes open for any announcements. But back to the Book of Householder Koans and Roshi Eve. If you've listened to earlier episodes of this podcast, then you may have heard my back-to-back episodes about Zen Koans. Koans have always been a favorite practice of mine, but I've drifted away from them off and on for the past few years until this book. This is unlike any book about Koans I've ever read. It drills deep into your hiding places, doing what Koans do perfectly. They stop you in your tracks, and they mess with your conceptual thinking and shake your false trust in the stability of what we think we know. Being drawn into questions without the comfortable ground of quote-unquote knowing offers a practice that can help us pause in our everyday rush to stress and anxiousness caused by trying to be somewhere or someone other than where we are or who we are at this very moment. A little bit more about Roshi Eve. Roshi Eve is a founding teacher of the Zen Peacemaker Order with her late husband, the renowned Roshi Bernie Glassman. She is also the resident teacher at the Green River Zen Center in Massachusetts. Roshi has trained spiritually based social activists and peacemakers in the U.S., Europe, and the Middle East, and has been a Spiritholder at retreats bearing witness to genocide at places like Auschwitz, Rwanda, and the Black Hills in South Dakota. Before that, she worked at the Greyston Mandala, which provides housing, childcare, jobs, and age-related medical services in Yonkers, New York. Eve's articles on social activists and social activities have appeared in the magazines including Tricycle and Shambhala Sun. I just loved this conversation with Roshi Eve. I felt as if we were old friends, and I was honored to talk with her. Among many other things we talked about, we talked about the importance of not knowing, about the surprise factor in the situations we find ourselves in life, and how those surprises helps our mind make leaps, and about how we should try to enter life with our whole selves, our bodies, and not just our minds. So don't miss this one of my favorite Buddhist subjects and one of the best books I've read in a very long time. The conversation starts now. Hello, Eve. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast.
Wendy, it's so nice to meet you, and thank you for inviting me, really.
I've been excited, especially when I first came across the book. I thought, oh, I have got to get her on this podcast. But the first thing I do need to say, and that's because I can't wait to tell you, is that this book, the Book of Householder Koans, is the book using koans that I have been waiting for someone to write. And you did it. Because I've been sort of a Koan aficionado for years and years since I was first introduced to them. And I took a deep dive into Koan work practice in 2016, and I wrote some articles to share. I was a career coach at the time, and I wrote some articles to share with career coaching clients on LinkedIn about how to use koans to shift their perspective on the people they work with or the people they complain about, which was typically the case. So I work with koans using the book Zen Koans by my teacher's father, Reverend Gilme Kabose, the father of my late teacher, Reverend Koyo Kabose, who founded the Bright Dawn Center of Oneness Buddhism, non-sectarian Japanese Mahayana tradition with strong Shin and Zen influences. So we were trained, and this is why I love this book so much, is we were trained as Bright Dawn lay ministers and senseis to be spiritual companions for those in our everyday lives. And as my podcast and book testify, I've been dedicated to this work since 2009. So to have this book of koans for the everyday, this is so for the everyday, is a dream come true for myself and to practice and to share with others. You know, I echo what James Ishmael Ford wrote in the review of your book. And I give him a big shout out because he recommended the book, and that's how I found out about it. He wrote, quote, "The only real Zen is the Zen of our actual lived lives. Zen's koans are stories that take us to where we really live, that show us who we are when we let go of the false stories we've been trapped within. This is Zen made out of our bones and marrow, our tears and laughter." So thank you, Roshi, for pointing the way to Zen made of our tears and laughter.
It's funny that you evoke koans, Wendy. You know, I did a whole summer of intensive study with my grandfather in the Dharma, my teacher's teacher, my Zumi Roshi, at the Zen Center of Los Angeles, one of the pioneers of Zen from Japan, who brought it here. And he, working with me, just said, "You are the worst koan student I've ever had." But I think really what stood in my way and what still stands and has stood in the way of so many people is the huge differences in culture.
Hi.
You know, to try to kind of get what it is that they meant by koans and 1,000 years ago in China is really not easy, and it is a very literary device. So we try to make it as simple as possible, but the origins are pretty literary. And then, of course, there's the whole issue that most of those koans don't directly address lay people, men, women with jobs and children and families and parents and all things like that. So yeah, it became very important as I loved koans and as I got into them more. I really wanted to make them more accessible to other people. And I'm so glad that my friend Roshi Eve Marko really joined in that effort.
Yeah, and I hear that. I think that's why I fell in love with Koans when I was first introduced to them, because I've always been a poet at heart. I've kept journals since I was like 6 years old or something. And so the literary it captured me. I kind of got what it was doing, even though I didn't get it spiritually, if you know what I mean. My body felt that literary movement. So that's why I liked it. The 66 Koans in your book, you know, which is why I find this so special. And you can talk about how this came about, because I'll ask you that next. But the 66 koans in your book are a gift from other practitioners, right? So who struggled with relationships, like you said, raising children, work, loss, illness, old age, death, and just plain old life. And just struggling with situations that we all struggle with them. It's part of our life. We just deal with it, or we don't deal with it so well. It's where conceptualization kind of keeps us stuck, and it hardens our life around those concepts and stories, and then bam, something made them stop and step out of the story into their real lives. That's those things that your 66 participants of this book shared. My Dharma grandfather, Reverend Gyome, wrote that, quote, conceptualizations become confused with real things, unquote. And that's exactly what happens. We get stuck in these conceptualizations thinking they're real until something stops us and makes us see it differently. So, since you're the teacher here, can you teach us about how Koans do that? I mean, mechanically, both the classical presentation of Koans, like the case studies, and the Koans from the everyday in your book. How does that work? How do they how do we get them to work? How do you teach them to work? How do they work? You said you were an awful Koan student, and how did you get to be a good Koan student?
Not sure that I'm a good Koan student to this very day. But I will say that I was, I think I even wrote this in the book, that I was inspired to do this book actually when I was teaching one evening. And one of these householders with four adopted children. She had wanted to adopt children for a long time. To do that, she fostered 16 children.
Whoa. Yes.
And finally got four that were, allowed by the courts to stay with her. As she says, she loved every one of the 16. And she raised these kids. And with the oldest one, she just talked about, one day he's around and he's bothering me. And I say, Miro, please pick up the tissue. Miro, don't do this, or I'm sweeping. Miro, please, like this. And he turns to her and says, Mom, why are you such a bitch? And she was stunned. That's the history of them. She worked so hard to have this boy. And he just turns to her and calls her bitch. Now, imagine what most people would, how they would react. Most mothers, fathers being called that in that context, yelling, getting upset. You can't have TV anymore. I'm taking away your phone. You can't go out here. You can't go out there. We react. And she described, and she's been sitting for a long time, she described she just stood still and she just took it in. She didn't reject it. She didn't react to it. She didn't try to deny it, which is very often what we do. We say, oh, I don't want trouble. I don't want to make a fuss. Life is too hard anyway. Okay, it's a big deal. It's like that. No, she fully stood there in that moment, taking in this thing of being called that word. And there was some enormous freedom that she experienced then. And that's what, and she's describing this in the Zendo. That's what she experienced. This freedom. Yeah, sure, I can react here. I can do that. but she took that moment to fully, fully live it, hear it, almost become it.
Yeah.
And she described that. I was so moved
Yeah.
that somebody could get to a moment like that and be able to be with it, become it so strongly. And the minute she finished telling that story, I said, I think we need to come up with householder koans because this is fantastic. She described an opening. A gate had opened to her. It could have shut her in even more.
Yeah.
Instead, it opened up and opened up and opened up, and she saw all the different options that were, available, but she felt actually very free.
Huh.
And for me, koans set you free. That's what they do. If you know how to practice with them, we say, Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them all. Well, it's hard to enter them all. But what it is that every moment, every exchange, anything that happens is a Dharma gate, meaning you're going to go deep into something and you're going to see something. You can experience like the essence of something, and we can call what that something is. I can even call it God.
Yeah.
You can access that using anything. And the vows we make is not to turn away from any gate, any door, any human being, any, bad action or bad, harmful words, but to use them as a way to fulfill our vows. And
Yeah.
that's what she described happened that day between her and her son.
Yeah. And that's I put that together, I think before a long time ago, but I read it again in your book about how it was connected to, I think it was in your book or something I read about you talking about your book. I get these things confused sometimes, unfortunately, is that how you tied it to the Dharma gates and our Bodhisattva vow, which, clearly seems impossible to do. But if you look at the Dharma gates as every little thing that happens to you every day, there's plenty of opportunities, right?
Right.
to
And you don't have to be anybody special and you don't have to be in any special place. It's like it's possible for everybody. And it does take practice.
So why do you think, and I thought of this, when I read that koan about the mother and the son calling her a bitch. Um, you know, why do you think we miss those opportunities for surprise or being, in the moment without reacting, which is nearly impossible for some of us to do. I'm a reactor, and it's a lifelong struggle. I mean, hopefully I will see a few more moments of non-reactivity before I die. But exactly, why do you think we don't notice those? Is it because we're completely unaware and not mindful, or what's the deal here? Why don't we notice these?
Yeah, what's the deal here? My husband, Bernie Glassman, that was his favorite. That was another householder koan that came from him. What's the deal here? What's going on? He formulated 3 tenets that my family in the Dharma, the Zen Peacemakers, follows. And the first one is not knowing. So, not knowing doesn't mean I'm ignorant, and it doesn't mean I've thrown away my educational masters or my masters or all the knowledge I've crammed into this little head. Not knowing has to do with really giving up our fixed ideas about me, him, you, life, whatever that is. This is a scaffolding for ourselves. It's like, I need this, I need that. I am this, this, I am that. Even like what you just said, I've always been reactive. And I don't know, maybe that is, I can say, boy, do I tend to get angry,
Yeah.
and that's how I experience myself. But at that moment, can I let go of even the things I'm certain about? Things I'll swear, things I know I've done, I know who I am, I know who I am. I know what life is. And can I just I say to people, you don't have to let it go like that. And I'm just throwing my hand wide open. But
Right.
imagine holding a ball and instead of clutching it, you're just loosening up your fingers. So you
Yeah.
don't have to throw the ball away. You don't have to throw all your knowing away, everything you've built up over the years. You don't have to do that. But can you just hold it loosely?
Yeah.
The minute you're holding it loosely, you are freeing yourself to see and bear witness. Oh, so what is this moment? Not seen
Mm.
through the prism of myself and my concepts and stories about me. What is this? What is this?
Yeah. What is
That's how
this?
we're freeing ourselves. And when we do that, then the action that arises really fits the situation much better than if it comes out of our thoughts that tend to be, by the way, the same thoughts again and again and again.
Right. 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 Yeah. It's like you need to kind of be brought to a dead end, before sort of the new way opens up, right? Something's got to stop you from doing that, whether it be surprise or catching yourself or slowly opening your grasp or whatever. And that reminds me of one of the Koans in your book. And um I hope you don't mind if we mention a couple or if you
Oh,
want to
please.
share. There's so many that spin around in my head, and it's like I've been working with a few that are really helpful for me in my particular situation in life right now. So they kind of stick in my head. But there was this one that was about an upstairs neighbor. With the two women, and they just got married, they just moved into this new apartment, and there was this guy upstairs that was I hope I tell this story as good as you wrote it, but this guy upstairs banging around, kind of talking loudly in a homophobic sort of way, and there was this, clearly there was this turn off, and it was taken by the perspective of one of the women, not the other. And she was calling him the homophobe and little names for him. And it reminded me that we had this we live in the most lovely little neighborhood. It's kind of like a little town. We're all close, but there's always one, right? There was one in our neighborhood who was just that angry bully of a man, and he was big, and he was just terrible, and he would yell in the neighborhood anytime a little dog barked. And we had two little dogs. There were little dogs all over the place. We have big yards. We have like 2/3 of an acre. We have big yards, and there's little dogs all over. And he would yell. He would, I think, have a little bit too much to drink in the evenings, and start yelling, "Shut up," and "Shut the you know what up," and all that. So it was very frustrating for everybody, but I'm an anger reactivity kind of person too. And I called him Mr. Shut Up. To this day, I called him Mr. Shut Up. And my wife is constantly saying, she tells me, you have got to stop calling him Mr. Shut Up. He has a name. He's not Mr. Shut Up. So that in that story, I'll get the end of this story, is she was caught unaware. I wish this would happen to me in this case, but she was caught unaware when the guy called her over outside. He was like pruning the bushes or something, and he said, "By the way, I like your wife better than you." And she just quickly said, "So do I." And I thought, she's an amazing woman. How did she do that? So yeah, It's just
Yeah.
amazing.
That's the freedom you have if you know how to let go. In other words, for that one moment, whatever names she had for him dropped.
Yeah,
When he said to her, I like your wife better than I like you.
right.
It just went. And she came back with this reply that even amused him. And for that moment, they really laughed together, you know.
Right.
That's what's possible for us. That's what is so beautiful. And as you know, with the old koans, the way they tried to do that is they would try to, as you say, catch people unaware. So how do you do that? To shock them, yell
Right.
at them. Sometimes they gave them blows. This is back a millennium ago. Sometimes, they did all kinds of things to shock people. But
Right.
what I realized, when Egyoku and I worked on this book, is that life gives us so many shocks. I
Yeah.
really don't think I need somebody to slap me, yell at me. I just don't. Life shows me day by day that things are not going the way I planned and that I'm
Yes.
not in control. Life throws this wall in front of me
Mhm.
all the time and I bang right into it. And again, I bang into it. And again, I bang into it till something happens. And I said, I look, oh, there's a wall there.
Yeah.
Do I really have to go bang into it? You see?
Yeah, that is so true. And I hear people talk about um the classic Zen koans and actually Zen stories and Buddhist stories, Tibetan stories. And I have people coming to me in the Sangha and so forth and saying, how is it that these people, they hear somebody say something and then they're immediately enlightened. And it's like, well, I wasn't there. I don't know whether they were immediately enlightened, but I do know that enlightenment moments are possible sometimes when you're shocked like that. They are you because you see things outside of your own stories.
Yeah. I sometimes say, yeah, I'm just like you, Wendy. I don't know what that means. I wasn't there, but that they've had moments of insight,
Right,
had openings.
right.
That you can see people all around you. People have openings.
Yeah.
That's why they stay on this path. It's not like, oh, I'm just waiting for my opening, so I'm sitting for 30 years. We maybe some of us bigger openings, some of us small. We wouldn't be on this track if we didn't, what I say, even from the beginning, sometimes sniff out something. There's something about this study or this practice that it's about my life, but it's about my life that is experienced a little differently from the way I usually do, but it's
Yeah.
still my life.
Yeah.
So what is that? And why is it that I feel I'm sometimes coming in touch with something so rare, so in some way extraordinary, and a freedom and a humaneness that is
Yeah.
so that I didn't know I had in me. So how did that happen?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it does. That's the whole part of the practice and the work with, doing it over and over again. Like I'm working with some of the Koans in the book and someone wrote, I know a reviewer or something wrote, I don't know where it was in the book, but it was like, I see Koans everywhere now. I see Koans everywhere now that I've seen this householder Koan, and it does absolutely do that for you. I'll share a little personal story. My podcast listeners know this. I totally lost my hair last year from alopecia, like totally bald. I lost like 80%, shaved my head, and I have lupus, and it can be a kind of a side effect of that disease. So when that happened, I guess I kind of just figured, well, that now I was always going to be bald. And so then I would go on these podcasts with my bald head and I'd say, always introduce myself as, by the way, I'm Wendy Shinyo, but I'm a lay minister. I'm not a monastic. I have alopecia because my head was this shiny bald head. And everybody assumed that I was a monastic. And then my hair started growing back this spring. And so I got bunch of curly hair, and not a lot. It's still thin, and I noticed it was starting to shed again in the last couple weeks. So now my koan is, where did the hair go? Where did the hair go? So I would just keep being curious about where the hair go instead of making it a personal disaster again. It's and it's been helpful actually. So that was a way that I did that, and I think we all have those opportunities to, instead of getting into the woe was me, or this is how I do it, or this is how you are, just be curious about it.
Right. And I'm going to assume that that's because of your decades of meditative practice. So, when we give instructions in meditation, the whole point of it is to not follow the brain, not follow the thoughts all the time. And as we do that slowly, you really get a sense that, oh, I'm not this voice that doesn't shut up ever. I am not that voice. There's something else going on here. And if I'm not that, then who and what am I? You see?
Exactly.
That's the experience. It feels mundane and it's dull if you've done it day after day for decades upon decades. But you clearly see the ability to not listen to that and put that aside for even stretches of time. And then you realize what else is possible.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that's why that practice is so important.
Absolutely, absolutely. The word koan and the mention of koans has become kind of widely accepted in our culture over the decades that I've been aware. Like, the tree falling in the forest when no one's there to hear, and what's the sound of one hand clapping, and like so many things in this culture, it seems to have become a caricature of itself, or at worst misappropriated, like karma and mindfulness. Yet from my experiences, those that want to study or work with koans are easily intimidated. And I think it's from, like you were talking about, the classical koans, where they were, terrible things happened to them, to surprise them. And I think your book totally removes that obstacle. But I still think most people think of koans as like sort of dirty tricks or riddles or whatever. I facilitated the course based on the book that my Dharma grandfather wrote for our lay ministry training students. And it was fascinating. And I love to facilitate the koan one because it was one of my favorite things. And I just loved I loved to see how they were so surprised at koans. So different people react so differently. Some have a complete, immediate, visceral dislike to them. It's like they're a threat, Some fall
or a contrivance.
A contrivance, yes. Some fall gently into the place where, like, not knowing is perfectly comfortable. And so I'm going to share some examples of comments I got on the papers that one was, koans make fools of us. They were, see, when we wrote papers, we were supposed to put a Dharma nugget at the end. So these were some of the Dharma nuggets that I'll always remember and I've saved. Koans make fools of us. I love this one. And I remember the look on this guy's face because he hated koans when they first started. He said, koans untie our shoelaces.
Wow.
That is, to me, he got it, boy. And then another one is, I haven't been able to make a sense of one koan yet.
Isn't that great?
And another one was befriend the dragon, which so opinions differ about koans, clearly. And like I studied a little bit with John Tarrant, and because he did a lot of poems, and he wrote this article in Shambhala Sun in 2003, and he wrote, quote, "Those who have used koans describe them as a poetic technology for bringing about awakening, an easy method of integrating awakening into everyday life, or the most frustrating thing they have ever done, an appalling waste of time, or a tyranny perpetrated by Zen masters." Unquote. So in the end, I think it's very hard to sit in that not knowing place, isn't it? Even if you glimpse it for a brief time, you can't stay there.
It is such a reflection of how dominated we are by our brain.
Yeah.
And I love my brain. I love my intellectual energy. I write, I do all kinds of things, and I use my mind a lot, and I appreciate what I get from it. But you can be such a captive to this yes, no, right, wrong, smart, stupid, makes no sense. Oh, this is great. We can get so stuck in that and live through that and judge life like that and judge other people, instead of being much more playful with it.
Yeah.
And I have, and I have seen people be so playful. I have seen people who I've only seen sitting, and when they do koans, they'll get up and they'll do things. They'll work with their body. They'll dance. They'll go up and down. It encourages us to use our whole selves. And especially Westerners, we come out of this Aristotelian tradition of our
Right.
minds, our minds, our minds. Our minds are no match for life, for the infinite life, and also for the playfulness and the
Playful.
humor of life. So I think you mentioned the word curiosity before.
Yeah.
Then, your mind's going to reject it hands on, I can tell you, because it doesn't know what to do with these things. And that's the magic of it. You let it go. It won't be able to work with your koans, but there's the rest of you that can work with a koan. And if that's the case, now what are you going to do?
Yeah. Yeah, that is so good. I love the your mind is no match for koans. I think that's a quote I'm going to hang on to. I hope you don't mind if I steal it. Because I think it's so true. And that this kind of reminds me of actually Tarrant talked about this in his book, Bring Me the Rhinoceros and Other Zen
Mhm.
Koans That Will Save Your Life. He talks about the playfulness and the fun of it and the silliness of it. Like his one, the whole point of the name of his book is ridiculous. And he talks about, quote, a 1, 2, 3, 4 rhinoceros. And he says, does that make any sense? Of course not. But it does make you smile, and it stops you from conceptualizing just for a little bit and focus on the sound of the words and the images and what you're doing right now.
Yeah,
And
the koan is a wonderful, when he says to his assistant, bring me the rhinoceros fan, a fan that maybe had that photo, picture, a painted fan of that. And I forget, he said it was broken. The
broken,
attendant
right.
says it was broken, and the teacher says, well, then bring me the rhinoceros. It's fantastic.
it,
It's
it,
just great.
It is, and it reminds me of quite a few Koans in your book. Like the one that comes to mind. Here's another one I'm going to share because I burst out laughing when I read this one. Although I wasn't laughing at the guy, I was laughing with the guy that was standing on an old stump pruning
Yeah.
his rose vine that was going up the downspout. And so he stands on the stump, and I can visualize myself in that position because I get myself in a lot of awkward positions in the garden. But he's standing on an old stump that broke apart, and while he was standing on it, it broke apart, and he ended up trapped in the vines and the thorns, and he couldn't move. He was actually suspended in the rose bush. And while he was suspended there, he laughed and he asked, where was I before so that I know where I am now? And then which also, I mean, I just was blown away by that. And then the summary at the end of the koan said, and I'll give that structure of the book away. There's always a summary that you two must have put in there, I guess. quote, what is the laugh that resounds throughout the whole universe? Where are you standing now? In a life which is ever changing, where do you place your feet? I love that. But can you comment more on this? Because I'm sure there are some, especially those who aren't familiar with Zen teachings or koans, who might respond as if this was so much nonsense. This is where we need a teacher. Roshi, what does that mean?
Yeah. Where was I before? It's such a funny thing. Where was I before? And now I'm here, It's like, first of all, think of how often, as you say, you're working on your garden, or I will go and weed. You think I'm thinking of what I'm doing? How often am I thinking? I'm somewhere else completely. I'm thinking about what I'm gonna, when am I, should I make my soup? But it's hot. Do I really want to make soup? But if I don't make soup, what am I going to eat? And what about this? And I would need to travel, but should I rent a car? And all this stuff, it's like, where am I? Where am I? Yesterday I wrote, I have a blog and I wrote about this, that my dog went swimming in this big lagoon. And first time I ever saw her swim. I've
Really?
had it for 5 years, never saw her swim. Likes to wade in, stays in the hot day in the water, enjoys that swim, never. And one day, yesterday, she jumped out and jumped into a big lagoon in chase of ducks and swam into the deepest parts and kept on swimming like this is second nature to her. I was so nervous about her. I ran down towards the water, but I had to run through some very dense trees and vines holding me. Well, there she is, swimming freely, happily, joyfully, just like an Olympic swimmer, this dog that never swam in 5 years. There's me, closed up and literally stuck between branches, that it was like a movie, how they imprison you. And you think any day now something is going to open up its mouth and swallow me because I can't get out. I can't get out. Well, I was in a hurry to go down there in case she needed help. But it's like, wait a minute, but you went through these things. Where was your mind? Where is your mind? And finally, my mind stopped when I'm imprisoned in these vines and I can't move. Forget about the dog. I can't move. You see? So
Yeah.
it was a wonderful thing that happened. And what is this? And these things keep on happening to me. And the only difference between me and people who haven't practiced like this is that I pay attention to them when they happen.
Right.
Oh, look at this. Where are you? What are you thinking about the dog? Forget the dog. Look at what happened to you. Where are you now?
Yeah.
This minute, where are you?
Yeah, that's a great teaching. That is. And we have the opportunities to do that all the time. But like you said, you kind of have to practice noticing the opportunities and then reviewing that and practice again and practice again. And it takes meditation or paying attention. I don't know. Maybe not necessarily meditation, whatever people can do to pay attention to what's happening to them rather than what's that voice that does that thing all the time. So yeah, definitely. A koan, and actually the guy trapped in the vines and you trapped in the vines it reminds me of that Tibetan Buddhist scholar and yogi Longchenpa, who wrote, since everything is but an apparition, having nothing to do with good or bad, acceptance or rejection, one may well burst out in laughter.
Right.
And that Dzogchen teaching, like I mentioned at the beginning, or maybe when we were talking before we were recording, that Dzogchen teaching is so much like Zen, I think, in a lot of ways, because it looks at the usual conversation in your little mind and it interrupts it and then lets you giggle about it a little. So you feel a little slight, sort of a lessening of an attachment to whoever that is you are in there. And you can't help but laugh at it if you catch it. You just have to catch it, which is like you had said before, it's a wonderful, freeing experience to be stuck in a koan, even if the koan is you stuck in the vines, and then ask that question of yourself that to someone else might make no sense.
But it also, I feel like it makes life so much more positive.
Yeah.
Oh, what's her name? She says life is much better than what you think of it. And I
Yeah.
don't think of her name. She's the one with the four questions, and I forget her name. Married to Stephen Mitchell. Um, but I will simply say, we judge so much.
Yeah.
That was a lousy talk I gave last night. You
Right.
mean I left the laundry overnight in the rain? What kind of a dummy am I? Or I mean, just think of how minute after minute we judge ourselves,
Right.
and we judge life, and we judge others so unnecessarily. And imagine if you say, I really don't know if it's good or bad. Right now, it may not feel so good, but do I know what's a good talk? Do I know what's a success? Do I know what's a failure? It's such a narrow way of looking at life. Life is so much bigger than that. And as we follow news and as we follow history, we know that we come across things that we think are terrible. And at the same time, something so beautiful came out of it that
Yeah.
it, that's life. Life is more creative than Shakespeare, from my point of view.
Right.
So why get down on anything? Why get pessimistic and why get glum and why get all those depressions and anxieties that it's rampant, as you know, nowadays.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
it's really unnecessary. It's just unnecessary.
Yeah, we don't know how to laugh anymore. And I think that's a lot of it too. We don't laugh at ourselves. We laugh at other people in making fun of them and judging them. And like you said, we're hard on ourselves. I'm very hard on myself. And then I realize that that's probably why I can be judgmental about others. I'm forever saying, "Oh, how stupid, Wendy. Oh, how stupid." One stupid little thing that I do. Well, it's not, it's just a little mistake. It's not stupid. It's just a little thing that I didn't pay attention to. So yeah, you made a exceptional point there. And you also talked a little bit before, and I kind of wanted to go back to this, circle back to the literary concept of koans. To me, and I mentioned this, and I don't remember whether it's before recording or at the beginning. I've always been a journal keeper and a poet, kind of a hack poet. I'm not very good, but I do it. To me, poems are always koans.
Yeah.
I They're always koans. To read or to write a poem, you have to make a leap from the known to the unknown, or the unknown to the known. You combine things that don't belong together, that in normal syntax and normal logical thinking, and you try to express feelings without using traditional concepts. So poems are always a little surprising, which probably is why so many people don't really understand poetry, right?
Yeah, I can see that. You see, I do love poetry. I don't read it, I don't write it, and I don't read it probably as much as you do. But you see, I think that every single aspect of our life can be like that.
Yeah.
That kind of lightness, that kind of leap, that kind of something unorthodox, something not the regular routine. Not
Yeah.
something that I'm repeating again and again. Subject, verb, object. Subject,
Yeah.
verb, object. Forget that. There's nothing about life that is linear like that. No relationship I've ever had was linear. Like, why am I living like that?
Boy, that is so true. I mean, it is absolutely true. Actually, in my last podcast with Rainn Wilson, I don't know if you know him. He was in The Office, the TV show, and he wrote this book. It's Time for a Spiritual Revolution. He's a
Mm.
Baha'i, and we had a fun talk. He's a funny guy, and we were talking about how one of the people don't read literature anymore. They don't read fiction because people don't read, because they lost their ability to concentrate. They scroll, 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 and they don't read fiction. And he says, he hears people say, I don't read fiction because, it's not real. And why would I want to read it? It's not real. And it's like, I always was a nonfiction reader. And when I was younger, I was a fiction reader. And I've gotten back to reading fiction again as I'm trying to extend my ability to concentrate from this, doom scrolling mentality. And it's so delightful. It makes life wonderful to read fiction again.
I tell people when we talk, let's say in a sangha or just even other things, please don't sound like AI. Don't sound, AI is so generic.
Right.
So bland. It's incapable, at least at this stage, of making leaps.
Right.
It's incapable of surprising you, really.
Right.
Other than saying, wow, look at how much it knew what to say. No, that's not a big deal. I would be surprised when it starts making leaps, and bringing in all kinds of things that we call distractions. The distractions are usually more fun than anything else. All these leaps our minds make, and it's so fantastic. It's what life is supposed to be, full of leaps. AI can't do that, but we can as human beings.
Right. I always told people that I like to read writers who write like rivers, without yield signs or stop signs or slow down, or they don't rarely have transitions. I'm reading a book right now called Appalachian Zen, which I hope to have that it just reads like a complete,
but by Kanji Rule,
it reads like a complete river. I am mesmerized by it. I have to be kind of wide awake to read it because I can lose myself in the thing, but it's just amazing, and I love that kind of writing. And so you're right.
He was just literally 5 minutes away from me.
Oh, really? Yeah, I got him as a suggestion from your publishing house, who after I booked you, they said, would you be interested in reading some of our other work in Buddhism? I said, sure. He said, why don't you check out his review copy? And I was like mesmerized. So it's wonderful. Just my kind of writer. No, like a river.
And for some reason, I don't know why, again, it's like a distraction. It reminds me, we went to Chiapas in Mexico years ago to work with refugees. At the time, there were a lot of things going on in Chiapas because Chiapas in southern Mexico is very rich in minerals, and so what happened is that certain gangs came in, wanted to kick out the indigenous people there. So my husband really loved clowning, and so we went with Mr. Yuhu, who is the head of the American group of Clowns Without Borders. And he's a wonderful person. His name is Moshe Cohen, but his clown name is Mr. Yuhu, and he's based in San Francisco, and he does a lot of things, but he loves to go to troubled areas and to perform there. So he's performed in Ukraine and in Poland and Chiapas and different refugee camps. So we're with him, and he does different things, and he's just wonderful. And finally, at the end, he says, okay, and now you are all going to disappear. Everybody's excited there. And he takes off his glasses. Now, I thought that was a riot. And I laughed, and, Bernie laughed. And nobody else was laughing. And you know what we realized? They didn't wear glasses.
Oh, yes. If you don't wear glasses.
They were so poor. They didn't wear glasses. So they didn't understand the correction that you get through glasses.
That's kind of sad now.
Well, it is sad, but in some way, look at how much you learned from that. You see, we assume we know. Yeah. So Moshe thought this was, Yuhu thought this is a great joke. This is a wonderful thing. They're going to laugh. This is a great way to end my show, and so on. But you see, he had to let go of a sense that, everybody knows glasses.
Right.
They don't. And that's why it's always going back to not knowing again and again. All
Right.
the things you think you know, you don't
Yeah.
really, you don't really know.
No, and that's so true. I have another last question, and this is a little bit inside baseball, but I think you can go with me here. Inside Buddhism, I guess. Within Buddhist circles across the decades that I've been practicing, you'll hear, and I even hear this today from someone says, you shouldn't take up a koan practice without a teacher. I've heard that for years. Also in the Tibetan Buddhist practices, you can't do that without a proper empowerment. But I think we need to drop a lot of these outdated and hyper rigid ideas of Buddhist practice that prevents us from, bringing our practice into the kitchen or the garden or the bathroom, which is a place my teacher, Reverend Koyo, used to love to have us practice because he used to do something called toilet gasho. He used to have
Mhm.
all different types of toilet gashos. So he had that kind of sense of humor, which I loved. So do you think we've gotten past, you can speak for maybe formal Zen practice. I can't. Do you think we've gotten past this admonishment in formal Zen practice?
I'll tell you what I tell people when they ask, do I need a teacher? I tell them, no. I mean, I personally think it's great. I wouldn't be say that if I didn't teach. I mean, that's why my life worked out the way it did. But if you can't, and many people live far away or whatever, then fine. But if you can check in with someone, really, make a regular of checking in, I don't know, once in 6 months, once in a year, do a retreat with a real teacher. And the reason is our minds can fool us like anything.
Mm-hmm.
You can take any one of these koans and work with it intellectually and write a book about it.
Yeah.
But all you did is you wrote a scholarly book about a koan, and I can give you talks and talks about koans. That's fine. But to really work it in your life, you have to let go of that brain to some extent. Not completely. I'm not saying drop the whole thing,
Right.
but to hold things loosely. And I think that we can fool ourselves.
Yeah.
Our brain can fool ourselves into saying, oh, look at you, you're a real master of koans.
Yeah.
But it's not so simple. And as you know, there are stories in the history of people who worked and worked and worked on a koan, and and it's like they couldn't get it, but they stayed with it and stayed with it, and the teacher always said, no, 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 no.
No, yeah,
They
right.
stayed with it and stayed with it, and then it's like suddenly everything became clear. But there's a wonderful. I'll just tell you a story about Peter Matheson, the writer and Zen teacher. He had a wonderful student whom I also knew, and that student worked on the koan Mu, which is a classical
Right.
Zen koan where someone asks Chao Chu, does a dog have Buddha nature? And Chao Chu says Mu, and Mu means not. But what does that mean? Does it mean that a dog really doesn't have Buddha nature? Are you kidding me? Why would he say not? And so there's ways of working on it. So Peter is working with his prize student, so his major student, and that student is working on Mu. 1 year passes, 2 years pass, 3 years pass, and this wonderful man, Hans, is always saying, no. Peter says, no. Hans comes in the next day, makes a presentation. No, no, no. The years pass. And it was Peter who told me this. And finally, they have this where again he rings the bell. No, no. And Hans looks at him and says, do you think I'm ever going to pass Mu? And Peter looks at him and says, Hans, it depends on you. If you think you passed Mu, then you passed. So what do you think, Hans? And Hans says, no, I didn't pass Mu. And he goes out the door. So Hans died before passing Mu, as far as I know.
Mhm.
But it didn't matter.
It didn't
You
matter.
see, it didn't matter. It didn't matter. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that really answers your
No,
question.
it does.
It moved me very deeply.
It does answer my question. You know, I started a sangha. I mean, I'm not a, like I said, I'm not an ordained teacher. It was just a sangha so that we have a place to practice together, and I think that's very important. You even talk about that in your book. I think that's even one of the koans in the book is like
Mm-hmm.
someone suggested, let's give Dharma talks. And they got down on her throat because we can't give Dharma talks. We're not teachers. And it's like, in our group we share that kind of thing, and we were trained to give dharma glimpses. We called them glimpses, so it was a glimpse of the dharma that happened in our lives, and we were trained to do that. And I taught that with my sangha. And it's wonderful because we serve as teachers for each other. And I think even if you can't find even a teacher to practice with or check in with, because a lot of people have tried to even do nowadays, though it's easier because there's virtual capabilities. And I think that has made a huge difference for people. But, any way you could keep yourself honest and away from conception. from telling yourself stories that you know what you're talking about. So there
Yeah.
is so much more I could talk to you about, and would love to like go through each one of these koans, but maybe someday you come on the podcast again and we can talk more about koans or something else you're doing in your life. And I will of course point a link to where our listeners can learn more about you and learn more about this book. But before we close, is there anything else you'd like to say that I didn't ask or you'd like to bring up?
Yeah. I would just say that my life in Zen is the source of the biggest richness in my life. I have lived a wonderful, wonderful life. But whether it's Zen practice, whether it's Zen-based social action, which the Zen peacemakers, are known for, it's fantastic. And I feel that practice, as I said before, if you're liable to anxiety, sadness, depression, self-criticism, if you lack confidence in yourself and life, really start sitting,
Yeah.
start feeling it, start bringing your attention down to your belly and feel the rest of you and the miracle of your existence. And over the years, it's going to change. It's going to change how you experience life.
That's an important thing to end with. But we'll give that little caution in that for a lot of times you it's terrible and it's boring and you say, what the heck am I doing here? And I get so many people say, uh what's the payoff? I'm not kidding you. What's the payoff? It's like enlightenment's the payoff, like something. There's this transactional kind of thought process that goes on, and it's like, wow, I can't even answer that question. The payoff is you will feel more comfortable if you keep doing it. That's the payoff, right?
It's a great journey. Don't
It
worry
is
about where you end up. It's just a great journey.
exactly, and that's the whole
Maybe
point.
not every single day, but nothing is great every single day.
No, you're right. And life is a great journey, and this is just part of it. It's wonderful. Thank you so much, Eve. This has been a great pleasure. And everybody will buy that book because I'll make sure it's easy for them to do so. So thanks again and have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much, Wendy, and I wish all your listeners a wonderful day.
That's it for this episode. You can find more about Roshi Eve and her activities in the show notes, including a link to buy the Book of Householder Koans, Waking Up in the Land of Attachments. Next up, of course, some announcements. We've just begun a new study in the Everyday Sangha where you can join me and others in our private, donation supported Everyday Sangha that meets virtually via Zoom every other week on Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. The Sangha is at the beginning of a study of the Pure Land Sutras with the book Great Faith, Great Wisdom, Practice and Awakening in the Pure Land Sutras of Mahayana Buddhism by Ratnaguna. Our meetings consist of a service first, including traditional vow recitations and other invocations, chanting, and a short meditation period. The service introduces more ritual and liturgy into the structure of our meetings, much like you would find at a non-virtual Buddhist temple, church, or sangha. It includes a Dharma talk by one of the practice leaders or myself, and after the service, we then open it up to discussion of the current book study or of anything that was inspired by one of the Dharma talks, or just about insights people have gained by reading the book. Consider joining the Sangha at this time to be a part of the new sutra study, to be a part of the practice, and a warm and welcoming Sangha community. You can learn more about the Sangha by viewing the latest bonus YouTube podcast where myself, Bradley Janayo Sensei, and Terry Hoskin, our practice leaders, talk about what the Sangha and what everyday Buddhism is all about. You can also support this podcast and the other activities of Everyday Buddhism by becoming a community member for $5 a month. If you do, you will have access to all members-only podcast, an education series, the Introduction to Buddhism course, the upcoming Buddhist book club, and many other things that will be announced on our private, non-Facebook group platform. Now, if you don't follow me or Everyday Buddhism on any of the social media platforms we post in, you can go to the Everyday Buddhism website and join the membership community or the Everyday Sangha, or just go to find out what's going on or listen to the latest podcast. Go to www.everyday-buddhism.com and click on either the tab that says Join Members Community or Join Everyday Sangha if you'd like to join one of those groups. Or you can go join through Patreon at patreon.com/Everyday Buddhism. Links to joining the Everyday Sangha and membership community are posted in the show notes. I thank all of you who contribute. I know I say this all the time, but it means everything. This podcast, the community, and the Sangha all depend on your donations to continue to exist. I don't seek podcast sponsors, and I don't ask for financial commitments through paid podcast memberships. So all the work that I do and the cost needed to support what I do is entirely self-funded except for your donations. Please consider a one-time or continuing donation through Patreon or on my website's Donate tab. You can even buy me a cup of coffee with the coffee cup link on the website. You'll find all these links on the show notes. And thanks to all of you who write in with comments and questions. As the latest bonus member podcast illustrates, I read your emails and may even pick your question to feature in a bonus podcast. Another way you can help, and this is important, is to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. As you probably know, it's a crazy world in the podcast universe out there, and the more people that get to know the podcast by your thumbs up or your review, the better off everyone will be. So it's important to share this with others if you find it helpful in your life. And if you could, take a minute to comment so people will know why it is you love Everyday Buddhism. All right, that's it for the announcements. And until next time, keep finding ways to make yours and everyone's days better.